After I covered the original trilogy Star Wars novelizations, there was really only one choice left. One last step in this novelization journey. It may have been a step too far.
Stupid! You're so stupid!
I'd read a few of the Star Trek TOS movie novelizations as a kid, and I remember there being some stuff in the books that wasn't in the movies. But this, all I can say is, buckle up. Okay, so this book was written by Gene Roddenberry. Not ghost-written either. Gene's hippy-dippy ideas and male gaze are prominent features of the book. He does an okay job for a TV writer that I don't think ever wrote a book before. The book begins with an in-universe preface from Admiral Kirk. He wants to let us know that he was named James after his father's brother and his mother's first love instructor. Whatever that means. He then goes on for a while about how old school and of average intelligence he and his fellows in Starfleet are, because when they sent the smartest people out on deep space missions, they lost themselves in the higher civilizations they encountered. He's modestly embarrassed about being chronicled in this book, but happy for the chance to push back on the heroic nature in which he's been depicted in the past. This preface is also the first mention of the term New Humans, which is some sort of movement happening on Earth to turn people into some kind of space hippies. It comes up a few times in the book. Admiral Kirk's preface has two in-universe footnotes. One referencing a film we in the distant past have no access to, and one pushing back on Kirk's claims of limited intellectual capacity. The book has quite a few of these footnotes, and some of them are consequential enough that we'll talk about them soon. Gene Roddenberry now pretends to live in the future that he has created, which sounds like fun. Kirk chose him to write the book, in spite of the outlandishly heroic way that the series depicted his exploits. He tackles the question, why Star Trek again? I suppose the real truth is that I have always looked upon the Enterprise and its crew as my own private view of Earth and humanity in microcosm. If this is not the way we really are, it seems to me most certainly a way we ought to be. During its voyages, the Starship Enterprise always carried much more than mere respect and tolerance for other life forms and ideas. It carried the more positive force of love for the most almost limitless variety within our universe. It is this capacity for love for all things which has always seemed to me the first indication that an individual or a race is approaching adulthood. It's pretty good. Did you know that all Starfleet captains receive a device implanted in their brain that, in the event of an emergency, will dump footage from the movie into their brains? According to the footnote, these implants were kept secret for a long time because of stuff like, the mind control revolts of 2043 to 47. It's like 4 years of mind control revolts. One minute you're hanging out in a museum, next thing you know, you're watching Klingons get roasted by V'ger in your head. The footnote on the Vulcan term Thyla, which can be translated as brother or lover, comments on speculation of which meaning was meant by Spock when referring to Kirk. Spock's recollection is that he meant brother. Kirk himself comments, I was never aware of this lover's rumor, although I have been told that Spock encountered it several times. Apparently, he had always dismissed it with his characteristic lifting of his right eyebrow, which usually connoted some combination of surprise, disbelief, and/or annoyance. As for myself, although I have no moral or other objections to physical love in any of its many earthly, alien, and mixed forms, I've always found my best gratification in that creature, woman. Also, I would dislike being thought of as so foolish that I would select a love partner who came into sexual heat only once every 7 years. So, after becoming an admiral, Kirk had entered into what the book calls a basic and simple 1-year arrangement with Vice Admiral Lori Ciani. So, like a limited marriage of some kind. Kirk retrospectively believes that Admiral Nagura had brought Ciani into Kirk's life to take his mind off the real love of his life, the Enterprise. By the events of the film, that arrangement was in the past, and they were simply colleagues. In the book, she's tasked by Admiral Nagura to brief Kirk on the V'ger situation, and I hope this is the last time I ever read about James Kirk's genitals in any context. Also, remember when there was that transporter accident that horrifically killed those two people? Remember that scene? The one that scarred a generation? Yeah. So one of those people was the new Vulcan science officer, and the other one? Vice Admiral Lori Ciani. Why? I have no idea. Kirk is, of course, horrified by the accident on the day, but he's quickly overcome by events, and she's never mentioned again. So I don't know what the point was. Or even why she was going over to the Enterprise. Why was she even going over to the Enterprise? Of course, the people in the movie don't immediately know V'ger's name is V'ger, or as the book spells it, V'ger. They just call it the Intruder. So this is the interesting thing, and I'm not sure the movie can really convey this. V'ger reaches out to Spock telepathically. V'ger is searching for his creator, and it encounters Spock because he's half human, his creator, and half Vulcan, able to communicate telepathically. This contact happens during Spock's Kolinar ceremony and is why Spock fails the test and has to go. So there's something of a reason why things come together the way they do. Spock doesn't just, happen to fail his test and happen to go find the Enterprise so he can find V'ger. He's specifically out to find V'ger as much as V'ger is out to find Earth. And in his case, Chapel continued, Starship Command fitted his psychological needs so perfectly that deprivation of it produced physical and emotional symptoms remarkably like those associated with narcotic withdrawal. McCoy looked up sharply, intending to comment that this was like comparing apples and coconuts, but then he realized that Chapel might just be surprisingly close to the real truth. Table tennis is a euphemism. So Deltans, they give off super pheromones, and when they do table tennis, they connect body as well as mind. Oh, excuse me. If a Deltan and a human were to play table tennis, the human would lose their mind due to the intensity of the experience. This the book tells us. So while Spock is out exploring V'ger, Decker decides it's in the best interest of science and the last hope for humanity for him to play table tennis with the Ilea probe, which looks exactly like his ex-girlfriend right down to producing the overwhelming pheromones. This he does for science, because the mind sharing, you see. If he could share minds with the probe, he might be able to communicate with V'ger. I'm not sure if Decker finished his game, because his recollection in the book was interrupted, this being a G-rated film and a PG-rated book. There's a swear from Kirk near the beginning. But what he finds out eventually is... So Ilea's body has been vaporized. It's gone. The probe is an exact replica. It's not Ilea, but it's the probe. V'ger controls the probe, but when he briefly relinquishes control, Decker learns that Ilea is still inside the probe. Like, whatever made Ilea, whatever you want to call it, she's in the probe. Why, I don't know. But she's in there. So yeah, there's a bit more to the story than what's in the movie. This is the first of 3 novelizations written by Vonda McIntyre. I know her mostly for the Star Wars Legends novel, The Crystal Star, which might be a major reason Disney wanted to shove Legends canon into a drawer. It is, without hyperbole, the worst Star Wars book I've read. Worse than the one where they kill off General Madine. Worse than Lando going to the slug races. I'd say worse than the one with Trioculus, but I didn't actually read that one. I just looked at it at the bookstore and threw it across the room. But she's actually quite good here. The books are well written. Did you know that Saavik is half Romulan? Mention of it in the script never made it into the final film, but it's true. She was raised on a failed colony world called Helgard. It is the official position of Romulans that they are incompatible with Vulcans biologically, but that is biologically false. The circumstances of Saavik's conception and upbringing are unpleasant, to say the least. And as a kid, she was rescued by Spock, who became her mentor. She's around 20 during the events of the book. Sometimes novelizations get a word or two wrong. It also calls the science lab Regulus instead of Regula. If you're enjoying this video, why not buy my book? Flight of the Pangolin is the story of an intrepid group of heroes who decide to exit the solar system over the objections of an isolationist faction. There's actually a lot more going on than that. There's space pirates, a giant spider for no reason, all kinds of other things. Buy it now online wherever you buy books or at our website, www.thepangolinrepublic.com. You can also get fun t-shirts and random other stuff if you want. Yeah, so Chekhov and Tyrell find a small child in Khan's shack before Khan finds them rummaging through his stuff. And they filmed this. They filmed a toddler on the set of Khan's shack, and I found pics of this kid hanging out with the Genesis device on the Reliant transporter pad, which is, it's something. It's a decision, I'll tell you. So Peter Preston is basically a main character in this book.
You're a tiger. My sister's youngest admiral.
This is most of Peter Preston's screen time in the theatrical cut. I still don't know why Scotty does that. Shock? In the book, Kirk and Spock run down to the engine room, then to sickbay, and that's a lot of setups. So in the movie, Scotty just bringing Peter to the bridge makes sense from a scene count perspective, but that's about it. Peter gets a bit more screen time in the director's cut, but he's all over this book. He's being tutored by Savick, and while he's only 14, he and Savick get along pretty well. Also, Scotty is hard on him because he's his nephew, so gets a lot of story points. Yeah, so Spock is aware of two of these scientists, Vance Madison and Del March. They're experts in sub-elementary particles. The book's description of them does not at all match the actors given their dialogue in the film. And it's at this point in the book I started to think that maybe Vonda McIntyre is just going to write whatever she feels like, and we're all just going to have to live with it. Anyway, Dr. Madison is also kind of in a relationship with Carol Marcus as the story begins. There's also a couple of Delton scientists on the team, and there's a cook, but most of the lab is on shore leave when Khan comes calling. Speaking of which, we get to know all the scientists just enough to be completely horrified when they all get, I'll say, conned. I don't want to get demonetized and use the other K word. It's not like a Saw movie or anything, but Khan is not a nice guy. He's not above torture. Can I say torture? I probably can't say torture. But that leads me to... You guys remember Joe Cheem, right? Yours is superior.
Yours is superior.
Khan's right-hand man. He helps Khan with the scientists, but he is not sold on all the more unnecessarily sadistic stuff. But he's also eternally loyal to Khan. So we get to see a little bit of this tension in the film.
No, sir. You have Genesis. You can have whatever you... Full power! Damn you!
But there's a lot more conflict going on in his head, and books are much better at portraying that. Yeah, Sulu gets hurt on the bridge during the battle, and David saves his life with CPR. So go, David. This book also has a lot of small details that are not in the film, and probably were just things that Vonda McIntyre felt like throwing in. There's 2 more books with her at the helm, so let's see what she has in store next, because this book was kind of wild. So I actually had a copy of this book as a kid. A friend gave it to me. Somewhere along the way I seem to have lost it, but I have a new copy now. And I'm sure I read the old copy a bunch of times. But all I really remembered was that it was a little bit bonkers. My memory was faulty. This book is all the bonkers. I went for days and days just muttering the mantra. This wasn't in the movie. This wasn't in the movie. I had to get to chapter 4, Page 77 of the book, out of 297 pages, 25.925% of the book, yes, I had to do the math. That's how bad this was. Before I got to something in this book that actually happened in the movie. A quarter of the book. So much stuff happens. Everybody gets drunk at a wake for Spock. McCoy is showing signs of carrying Spock's katra, but nobody understands what's going on. David and Savick start playing table tennis. There's a cat lady named Farandal, who's a navigator on a freighter. Captain Esteban of the Grissom shows up, and he argues with the Marcuses about Genesis. We are introduced to Valkris, a Klingon who is on Farandal's freighter. Savick joins the Grissom's mission to study Genesis. Carol Marcus and Dr. Chapel go to the space lab to take care of the bodies of the scientists. Kirk and David are having a tough time getting along. David joins the Grissom team. Aboard the Grissom, Savick meets a scientist who is a Glaziver, which is a kind of crystal person.
My brain hurts!
So yeah, now you're caught up. Let's start the movie. Remember how I said that in the book for Star Trek II, they called it Alpha Ceti 6 and Regulus? Well, Vonda McIntyre watched the movie and replied,
"Why should I change? He's the one who sucks."
So Valkris. Valkris is on a mission to restore her family's honor. Her older brother was so spectacularly unfit to lead the family that she was chosen in his place. But she still carries a great deal of affection for him anyways. She's won a lot of duels, and at one point considers challenging the freighter captain she's chartered. I like Valkris. She also speaks briefly with Farandal, the cat lady navigator. Valkris is intrigued by the cat lady's people, but she realizes she doesn't really have time for conversation because Valkris is on a mission. She gives an obscure warning to Farandal, which leads the cat lady and one of the other freighter crew to peace out in a short-range scout ship. Towards the end of the book, there's a passing reference to this ship being recovered in the middle of nowhere, letting us know that Farandal survived, but she does not appear in subsequent books. You would think that would be obvious, but there is a reason why I am telling you this. Anyway, Valkris. Sometimes she's depicted as maybe Krug's love interest, but in the book, Valkris is just content with Krug's promising to restore her family's honor. The book makes a lot of references to the Klingon language having various strata of meaning and style of speech for addressing different situations and people. I'm reasonably sure none of this was incorporated into Mark Okrand's work on making a usable Klingon language, because the Klingon dictionary would be absurdly huge. Yeah. Scotty returns home for Peter's funeral and sees his niece, Dannon Stewart. They argue about a variety of things in their grief. There's a bunch of Peter's funeral stuff, but it's nothing spectacular. Was the book running short? I don't understand. We all know Sulu's awesome. Even the movie knows it. There was a brief mention in the previous book about him getting promoted to captain and being on track for his own command. But here he was in line for the Excelsior. But because of his involvement with the Genesis thing, he's passed over in favor of Captain Styles. Sulu is not happy about this, as you might expect. But it definitely makes him more motivated than ever to stick it to Starfleet when Kirk comes calling to help save Spock. There's a long paragraph in the book about it, and what we got on screen is like a Stone Age version of the book's description. So, I don't know what Vonda McIntyre thought this special effect was going to look like, but she thought it was going to be amazing. It is not what we got in the film. I'm not going to read it. It's too long. Yeah, and all the other excitement of the movie, it gets kind of lost that Uhura's part in this plan was absolutely essential. She scrambled Starfleet's comms so completely that the rest of our heroes were able to steal the Enterprise from space dock. She even went so far as to intercept Excelsior's distress call when its transwarp drive failed. She then escaped to the Vulcan embassy, but Federation police almost arrested her before Sarek dramatically appeared and granted her asylum. I'm assuming from there she hitched a ride with Sarek to Vulcan so she could catch the big ceremony later. We're still talking about Carol Marcus. Carol goes to visit Vance Madison's family. You may or may not recall Vance was the scientist she was in something of a relationship with at the time of his death, when the science team were all horrifically conned. The book must have been running short. I don't know. Yeah, Savik's Romulan side briefly takes over when the Klingons kill David. She's so upset that she starts choking the nearest Klingon to death, and it takes like 3 phaser blasts to stun her. So that would have been fun to see in the movie. So during the self-destruct sequence, Kirk starts to question whether the Enterprise's computer is actually self-aware and understands what's happening. Like he can sense like some sorrow in its voice or something. He's definitely losing it. After the Enterprise self-destructs, Krug laments not interrogating the prisoners, reasoning that if he had known David was Kirk's son, he wouldn't have executed him, and that the loss of David gave Kirk the boldness to blow himself up. It was a poor tactical move on Krug's part, and he realized it. So when our heroes, minus Kirk, who's still on the Genesis planet, are beamed aboard the Klingon ship, Savik attempts to communicate with the Klingon at the transporter controls in his language. This is Maltz. That's played by John Larroquette. Yay! Maltz can speak English, referred to as standard here in the book, and an argument ensues over dialects. Savik is barely able to speak the high dialect she learned at the Academy, which is apparently offensive to whatever social group Maltz is a part of. Maltz calls the Federation obliterators of diversity for Savik's assertion that they speak a unified language in public. Fun question for the folks at home. How soon is now? Did it originate in Star Trek 3?
How soon is now?
Or with the Smiths? Let us know in the comments. So there was a dropped subplot that the Pon farr experience that young Spock and Savik went through on the Genesis planet led to Savik becoming pregnant. That is not touched on in this book. We'll see. Maybe it's touched on in the novelization to Star Trek 4? Can I make it through another Vonda McIntyre book?
Did I take this job for a quick buck? We may never know the answer to these questions.
Continued in part 2.